Whoa, hold on. Before we get started, we've got to go over things first. Yes, I know how late this video is, but I couldn't start working on it until after I finished the Mario Wonder video. In the future, I wholly intend on getting these out before the end of the year. Also, I need to lay down some ground rules so that you understand the criteria for these videos in the future. Although this is a 2023 Game of the Year list, the games on it are not exclusive to this year. It's anything that I've played for the first time this year, so even if it came out in 1992, it still counts. Naturally, that also doesn't include any games that I've already played. And I have to have actually finished the game for it to be added to the list. I'm also going to be imposing a cutoff date of November 1st, and any game I play after that date will be added to the next year's list. This is because I don't think I'll have enough time to properly gather my opinions about the game before I list it, and also so that I can get started on the video so that it's actually out in time. Right now, I'm going to rank every game that I've played this year, but if there's ever a year where I play a ton of new games, then I'll just do my top 10. This year, I played 14 new games, and they are all ranked accordingly, though it's entirely possible that my opinions on some of them will change in the future. Alright, I think that's all I had to say. Cue the music! No. Okay, before you guys say anything, I swear that I can explain. And besides, it's not like I have that many hours in the game anyway. Alright, fine, you got me. Yes, I seriously played over 100 hours of Farming Simulator this year. And unsurprisingly, it was easily one of the worst games I've ever played. But do I regret it? Nope. But before I get into that, I'd like to complain about this game a little more, and I think at this point I have more than earned it. Firstly, this game looks terrible. Aside from some basic shadows, there's just no lighting at all in this game. Seriously, I feel like I'm in a Gmod sandbox here, but even some of those have better lighting than this game. It makes everything look super boring and flat, which isn't helped by the pretty atrocious pop-ins either.
Nice.
I get the feeling it's because they pump out one of these things almost every year, and also so that they can cram it onto an iPhone. Another thing I really hate about this game is the AI. These cars are so obnoxious. They get in the way, are somehow even slower than your tractors, and will sometimes just run straight into you for no reason. The people walking around are super artificial too, and all it takes is for you to stop and look at them for a second to realize that they aren't doing anything at all. You can't even get the satisfaction of running them over either. At the very least, neither of these two things actually have an impact on farming, which is something I certainly can't say about the workers you can hire. For some fields, they work great, but for others, they will constantly skip over areas because their shitty pathfinding can't find a way to properly get to it. Oh yeah, and they run into cars too. Already, these are some pretty big issues, and that's not even mentioning the myriad of other problems this game has, like your truck being able to drive so fast that it can do this when you hit a bump, the game lagging super hard if you take the camera behind a combine, and the train— oh, Jesus! Holy shit! But despite all that, I think the worst thing about this game is its lack of customization. For a farming simulator, the game is surprisingly unrealistic, and there aren't any options to remedy that. For example, when you load up a wagon, the game just autofills it for you. You don't have to worry about it overfilling, and you certainly don't have to worry about lining your auger up properly either. Or you could make it so that getting into accidents would actually have consequences, in the form of a fine and potential equipment damage. Or driving into a river. Or getting plowed through by a train. It's little things like this that would actually make the game more engaging, and would require a bit more focus from the player. But on the other hand, I don't think the game is as streamlined as it should be either. There are some great options to turn off whether or not the seasons matter for crops to grow, how fast crops can grow, and just the general speed of the day. And yet, there are other super obvious features that have yet to be implemented, like turning off the rain and snow, or just having it so that it doesn't affect the harvesting process. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that I wish this game could provide the ultimate farming experience. I can't believe I just said that. Whether that be one that's super realistic, or one that's not realistic at all, but is more streamlined, or maybe even one that's a good combination of both. Instead, it's just a combination of both, and it really does irk me. Seriously, this type of game could be done so much better, and if somebody were up for it, I think they could totally blow this game out of the water. But I think what you're all probably wondering at this point is why I played it for so long if I disliked so many things about it. Music. I love music, and this game provided the perfect opportunity for me to listen to and engage with it, while also not doing nothing at the same time. And because of that, I was able to discover some really great artists and albums that I might not have discovered otherwise. I loved getting to experience the neurotic nature of DEVO's debut album, the vivid circus imagery painted throughout ELP's Carnival 9, and the fantastic guitar solos presented by Wishbone Ash and Argus. And because of that, I don't regret playing Farming Simulator at all. The game still sucks, though. Oh boy, this game is not aged well. To give the game some credit, I definitely think it has charm, and it's got some pretty bizarre stuff for a Mario game. There's barely any of the traditional enemies, Mario goes underwater in a submarine, and there's even a bullet hell-esque airplane level, which is admittedly pretty awesome. A lot of the music's also pretty great. I also recognize the novelty of this game as well, being the first Mario game on a handheld device, something which we certainly take for granted nowadays. But being one of the first of its kind, it's obviously pretty flawed, and I think it mostly comes down to the controls. They're just super stiff and awkward, which isn't helped at all by how cramped and tiny everything is. It makes even basic actions like jumping over pits feel like a chore. It was kind of fun to see what the game was about for the first time, but I probably won't be playing it again. Mario Land 2 improves on just about everything the first game tried to do. The controls are better, the amount on screen feels less claustrophobic, and the levels are generally more enjoyable. Also, Wario! However, the game's still kind of meh. Other than being able to pick whichever world you want to go to first, there really isn't a whole lot of interesting stuff going on here. It's mostly uneventful, except for the final level, which for some reason the developers decided to make insanely hard. The rest of the game is so easy in comparison. I have no idea why they made it so difficult. I actually ended up cheating my way through it because I couldn't be bothered to put in the time to actually do it, and I generally try to avoid that when playing older games. Still worth it though. While it's better than its predecessor, it has a pretty considerable amount of distance to go before it's as good as its brothers on console. Wow! And here's yet another Game Boy game that I played for the first time this year. I wonder why. Okay, but this is seriously the last one. Funnily enough, this is the only mainline Kirby game that I've ever played, and it's also the only game in the series to not use the character's defining trait. Yeah, Kirby can't copy his opponent's abilities in this game, he just eats them or spits them back out. So what you get is a pretty primitive version of the character, whose only real defining ability at the time was being able to fly indefinitely. It's still got a lot of the building blocks of Kirby though, and there are a lot of songs, enemies, and villains that show up repeatedly throughout the series afterwards. I think the game is pretty decent for what it is, and while it's not overly complex, it's short enough that I never felt like I was wasting my time while playing it. It's definitely got a couple of cute moments, like some of the flashier transition cutscenes, and the level where you have to fight an airship. Overall, it's a pretty harmless game, but one that isn't overly spectacular either. At this point, I think my thoughts on this game are pretty clear by now, and while it certainly isn't the worst game that I've played this year, it was a pretty massive disappointment for me. There are still a few more things that I want to discuss though, and luckily it's all positive this time. While I was playing through the game to get footage for the video, I was pretty surprised to find myself actually enjoying the game. Just running around from place to place, looking for things to highlight, was way more fun than the times I had previously spent trying to actively explore the world, and I can see now how someone could enjoy the game if they were just casually looking around. I'd also like to acknowledge the pretty staggering success of my Tears of the Kingdom video. As of writing this, it has a little over 17,000 views, and it has single-handedly given me over 300 subscribers. I can't fully express just how thankful I am for that, especially for what is my first video essay ever. But I'll still try anyway. Thank you all so much for the support, whether you watched the video, liked it, or subscribed to my channel, and for all of the thoughtful and interesting comments. My main goal, first and foremost with that video, was to create a discussion around the game, and I think I accomplished my goal. If you liked Tears of the Kingdom, then I hope my video was able to give you a different perspective. And if you didn't like Tears of the Kingdom, then I hope my video was able to validate your experience. With that being said, this game sucks, haha! Now, I'll admit that this isn't my first go-around with Doom, but I think this is a pretty special exception. Vanilla Doom, while fun, is definitely a little basic. I mean, the thing can run on a calculator for Christ's sake. You can't look up and down, there's no jumping, and despite how fast Doom Guy can run at a full sprint, the combat feels kinda sluggish. The weapons just don't have enough oomph to me, and the enemy variety is the only thing that keeps the combat engaging. It's just not as frantic and intense as some of the later games. But Brutal Doom...
yourself! I'm interested in this.
For the longest time, Symphony of the Night was one of those games that I would constantly hear about, but had never actually played. Some of that was due to the game's questionable voice acting.
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world!
It was not by my hand that I'm once again given flesh. I was called here by humans who wish to pay me tribute.
Tribute? You steal men's souls and make them your slaves.
Perhaps the same could be said of all religions.
Your words are as empty as your soul. Mankind ill needs a savior such as you.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk. How about you?
However, I think the most notable thing about Symphony of the Night was how it and Super Metroid were able to create an entirely new genre of video game, the Metroidvania. Now, I'm a pretty big fan of Metroidvanias. Several of them have provided some of the most unique and amazing experiences I've ever had with the medium, so I felt personally obligated to check this game out. The reason it took me so long to finally play it is because A, it's a PS1 game that came out in 1997, and B, modern releases of this game aren't actually the original version. They changed the voice acting, because of course stupid companies have to go and change classic dubs for no reason and provide no legal way to ever view them again. But I finally got around to playing it this year, all in its original glory to boot. And it was overhyped.
What?
Don't get me wrong, I think it's a pretty great game, but I didn't end up jiving with it as much as I'd hoped. I feel like the layout of the castle just doesn't really lend itself to being backtracked through, especially when the fastest way for the main character to get around is by constantly doing this. There's fast travel points, but they're few and far between, meaning that there's a good chance you'll have to moonwalk through several long corridors, which are still full of enemies if you want to get back to a previous area. The way the fast travel works isn't very great either, as the warp rooms just cycle between each other in a set order, often forcing you to jump in and out of them until you hit the right one. There are a lot of things to like about this game though, like the weapon and inventory system, which can actually change the way combat works depending on what you use. There's heavy weapons, long swords, and shields, but I ended up using a knife for most of the game because I liked how fast it was. The different transformations like the bat and wolf create some fun opportunities for exploration. Although a bit of a pain to traverse, the castle does genuinely feel interconnected, and a lot of the music's pretty great too. The game wasn't terribly long either, which is something that I can always appreciate. Actually, the game can be really short depending on what ending you do, as to get the good ending you have to go through the inverted castle, which is the entirety of the regular castle but flipped upside down. This seemed like such an interesting concept at first, but unfortunately, I don't think the game does enough with it to make it actually interesting. It's literally just the same rooms as before, but upside down. There are different enemies, but to me that absolutely does not justify exploring the entire thing again. It was easily my least favorite part of the game, and if I ever do play it again, I'll probably just skip it. I know how beloved this game is by some, and I really do wish I could have enjoyed it more, but at the end of the day, there's just too many problems for me to truly enjoy it. The credits song is pretty fire though.
Job for you, 621.
I am not an Armored Core fan by any means, and to be completely honest, the entire reason I was drawn to this game in the first place is because it was made by FromSoft. Obviously, Armored Core 6 is a far different outing than what From has been doing for the last decade, but I'm totally open to them doing something different for a change, or in this case, going back to their roots. Either way, the game looked like a lot of fun, and turns out it is a lot of fun. Your first couple of hours in this game are exhilarating, just skating effortlessly around in this giant mech and blowing stuff up. It's so great. The customization in this game is amazing too, not only because of the numerous weapons and parts you can use to kit out your mech, but also because of the cosmetics. The moment I realized that I could change the color of my mech, I spent around 30 minutes creating Ava Unit 1. That would have been the end of it, but then I realized that you could also have multiple presets, so I got to work making Unit 0 and Unit 2 as well. The best part is that they all ended up being useful, and I fitted each of them out differently as I progressed through the game. Unit 1 was the reliable middleweight with a submachine gun and shotgun combo, Unit 0 was the bulky prototype with 2 shotguns, and Unit 2 was the sleek newer model with dual miniguns. Swapping between these three is what kept the game engaging for most of my playthrough. Most because the game has some pretty egregious balancing issues, especially near the end. Some weapons are far better than others, and a lot of the difficulty can come down to whether you're using the right one or not. Unfortunately, I wasn't, and some of the late game bosses and levels were exponentially more difficult for me than they should have been. I'm pretty sure the level where you have to fight G1 Michigan is almost impossible to do with bullet-based weapons, as you run out of ammo long before the level is over. I had to look up how other people were doing it just to beat this level, and once I switched my build over to a lightweight with dual flamethrowers, I was easily able to beat it on my first try, and the rest of the game became substantially easier as well. It's pretty frustrating that the game can be both too hard and too easy just depending on what weapons you're using. And if the intention was to force you to use different weapons for every level, I don't think the game does a good enough job emphasizing that to the player. It certainly wasn't a thought that ever crossed my mind while playing. I just thought that all the weapons would be pretty equal, and that switching over to something else wouldn't make much of a difference. I don't think the story in this game is particularly great either, as it fell into the background during most of my playthrough, and whenever it did become more of a focus, I didn't think the writing was very great. I didn't care much for the characters, and by the end I was left kind of dazed and confused. I'm sorry if I'm criticizing this game too much for how high up it is on the list, but I feel the need to fully express my thoughts on the game overall, rather than just giving the positives. I also think it's way easier to get more specific with criticisms rather than compliments. So while it may seem like I'm hating on the game, there are actually quite a few things that I do enjoy about it. I really did have fun for most of my time with it, and I'll probably play through it again at some point in the future.
I won't miss.
Like with Doom, this isn't the first time I've ever played the Stanley Parable, and if it were, it would be considerably higher up on this list. But to say this version of the game is just a re-release, you would have to severely overlook just how much new stuff is in this game, and in a lot of ways, it's somewhat of a successor to the original. And what is new is super funny. Seriously, I haven't laughed at a game this much in a long time, and it totally captures the humor, but also somewhat existential nature of the first game, even 10 years after it was released. Some obvious highlights include the Museum of Negative Steam reviews, the room with the button that skips progressively more time, the entirety of the Stanley Parable 2 exhibition, especially the bottomless hole, and of course, the reassurance bucket. It's such a stupid concept for a joke, but I'm so glad that they added new content to the base game by placing it in the office at the beginning. It seriously made me do all of the endings over again just to see what would happen if I brought it along with me, and it was actually worth it every time. You even get it in the epilogue if you send it through the escape pod beforehand. It's so awesome. The only thing I don't like as much about this version is that they switched out the Minecraft and Portal sections for Firewatch and Rocket League. Either way, this game is a total 10 out of 10, and the only reason I have it here is because I've played most of it before. Seriously, if you haven't played the Stanley Parable before, then do yourself a favor and pick up the Ultra Deluxe version. After you finish watching this video, of course.
Thank you!
Wind Waker was the final of the 3D Zeldas that I had yet to play, as it had eluded me for quite some time. I was almost positive that the HD remaster of the game was going to be ported over to the Switch. I'd say it was definitely one of the better known games on the console, and with almost every other popular Wii U game being ported over, I figured it was only a matter of time. I was wrong. Eventually, I was able to pick up a copy of the GameCube version at a local retro gaming store, which was, ironically, the same store that I got my first 3D Zelda game from some 8 years prior. But to talk about the actual game, I think it's pretty great, and it was able to finally scratch that Zelda itch that Tears of the Kingdom hadn't been able to previously in the year. For starters, it's got an actual story, with tons of lovable characters like Tetra, Medley, Makar, and the King of Red Lions. It even has probably the most fleshed out version of Ganondorf's character to date. Some of the dungeons are truly intricate and fleshed out, like the Tower of the Gods or the Earth Temple, and there's loads of fun minigames scattered throughout the world. The music, I mean, come on, just listen to it. Also, the art style, mwah, it's totally timeless. I especially love all of Link's facial expressions. The game's got a great sense of humor as well. But despite how lighthearted it often is, it's still got moments of true artistry and a genuine love for the medium. I wish I could stop there. However, like with many of the other games on this list, it's not without its flaws. While I was playing through it, and especially near the end, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the game seemed off. Like, it wasn't entirely finished as it should have been. There's only 5 dungeons in the entire game, the third pearl is literally just given to you for free, and the abundance of side content is what makes up the bulk of the game. There isn't even a proper credits cutscene either, just this kind of weird bubble credits sequence. After I finished the game, I looked into it more, and sure enough, the game had an unfortunately rushed development near the end of its completion. 2 dungeons ended up being scrapped and repurposed for the next Zelda game, which is probably also why Twilight Princess has so many of them, not that I'm complaining. These 2 dungeons were replaced with the infamous Triforce quest, a quest which requires the player to find 8 treasure maps, and then track down the locations presented on all of them. This part of the game is pretty notoriously hated, but being the ultimate contrarian that I am, I really didn't mind it so much. Whenever I play a Zelda game, I always try to get all of the heart pieces. They're a pretty major reward, and I think collecting them is part of the fun of a Zelda game. Because Wind Waker has so few dungeons, and therefore so little opportunities to receive a full heart container, there are naturally a lot of heart pieces out in the wild, or rather, the sea. I'd wager that about half the heart pieces in the entire game are hidden behind treasure maps that point to some location in the ocean. Or, at the very least, you'll have to do a lot of sailing to find all of them. Because of this, I got pretty accustomed to just sailing silently around the ocean, and despite how empty it often is, I think it captures a certain mood that it wouldn't have had otherwise if the map was more populated. There's a kind of calm to sailing great distances across the ocean, just watching the waves rise and fall with the tide, or letting seagulls fly along with you. It's not the most thrilling thing to be doing in a video game, and I certainly think that Wind Waker isn't as replayable as the other titles because of it, but there's a certain charm to it. Still, the Great Sea is pretty barren for an open world, and it can become pretty tedious to try and map it all out. It can also become pretty grating having to play a song every time you want to go in a different direction. But mostly, I just wish that the game had more main quest content and dungeons, especially after I'd just been given a lack of that in Tears of the Kingdom.
The Savannah. These grassy plains host a wide variety of life. But perhaps the most amazing of them all is the wild elephant. Weighing in at around 7 tons, the elephant is the largest land animal in the world. This female is returning to her herd after a long day of foraging. Elephants are very social creatures, and this female will stay with her herd for the rest of her adult life. This herd has found a watering hole and will be using it to their advantage in the days to come. With their versatile trunks, they can spray themselves down with water to help keep cool in the African heat. But to maintain a constant supply of food and water, they must eventually move on. Herds like this can travel around 30 miles in a single day. But despite their intimidating size, they must remain in constant vigilance. This is a marmor, well known for their voracious appetite and their viciousness. Unfortunately for this elephant herd, they've been targeted by a group of them. But it would be unwise for them to attack the elephants head-on. One stomp from an elephant would mean certain death. So they'll have to be more cunning. A young calf, perfect for the marmors. Splitting into groups, they take action, forcing the elephants to run. The calf is not as fast as the rest of the herd and quickly falls behind. The marmors have won.
Fallout!
Super Monkey Ball 2 is one of those Celeste Super Meat Boy type games where the core of the experience involves you constantly throwing yourself to your death over and over until you finally succeed. The concept itself is pretty simple. You play as a little monkey in a ball and you tilt the level around to try and get him into the hole. But man, do they push it pretty far. I'm talking puzzle levels, moving platforms, obstacles, twisty slides, tightropes, free falls, half pipes, just so much stuff that requires extreme precision. And what's funny is just how insanely juxtaposed it is from the story. For how childlike the game may seem on the surface, it is deceptively difficult. But properly timing that perfect shot, or finally maneuvering your way through a tricky level, is beyond satisfying, and it's a feeling that's only amplified as you get better at the game. I don't even know how speedrunners can play through this game with a straight face. I mean, just watching some of this stuff is enough to make me drool. With such high difficulty, it is of course complemented with some pretty great level design, most of the time anyways. There are 100 levels in this game, and I don't think any two of them are alike, or at the very least they utilize similar concepts in entirely different ways. And because of the abstract nature of the game, they really just made whatever they wanted. There's a jab at postmodernism, air hockey, an elegant patter of descending stairs, and several levels with extra challenges, which can be really tempting sometimes. There's even a level with a URL to the Monkey Ball website, and the final level is literally just the logo of the company that made the game. My only criticism is that there's a couple of really obnoxious levels here and there that can make replaying the game less fun. Other than that, it's a really good, perhaps rage-inducing time, and I definitely recommend checking it out. Or, at the very least, watch this guy speedrun. I mean, Jesus, look at him go. For someone who's played Minecraft for a considerable amount of his life, it's a little surprising that it took me so long to play this game. Or maybe it isn't, now that I think about it. I think that I kind of just thought that Terraria was like Minecraft, but 2D, which it most certainly is not. Where I think Minecraft has a greater focus on the versatility of its building, Terraria has a greater focus on its progression. You start with almost nothing, just a couple of weak wooden items and your own wits. You move at a near crawl, you can't jump very high, and any fall you take could be very lethal. But throughout the game, you slowly gain the upper hand, acquiring better materials, weapons, and armor. Your bow can become a gun, then a minigun, and finally a high-tech laser rifle. The Hermes boots let you run faster, and later on, faster still. Your measly jump turns to a double jump, then wings, and then the ability to fly. But at the beginning, you don't know any of this, and the way the game slowly unravels it all out to you is what makes it so engaging. Up until its very end, you never know what's in store for you next. Before I fought the Wall of Flesh, I seriously thought I had seen most of the game. I had explored the entirety of the overworld, hell, and adventured through a sizable amount of caves. What more could there be? Turns out, there were still 3 mechanical bosses left to fight, a new biome to explore, freshly spawned ores to mine, I hadn't even seen the jungle temple yet, and there were still plenty of optional bosses and events that I had yet to experience. But again, the game doesn't tell you any of this, and it's up to you to find out what comes next after each new milestone. Even when you defeat the final boss and the credits roll, there's a 99% chance that you still haven't seen everything yet. There's also just an intrinsic joy to charting out this strange new world that you've been dropped into, and the procedurally generated nature of the game means that there's a new adventure to be had every time. To me, these are the best aspects of Terraria. However, I think there are other aspects that can significantly hinder the overall experience. Specifically, my biggest problem with the game is the relation between the items you have and the bosses. While visually great, I'm not a fan of the bosses in this game. Their mechanics are almost entirely the same across every single one of them. They constantly move towards you and shoot hundreds upon hundreds of projectiles. I would argue that there is very little skill required on the player's part to beat them, and their difficulty only comes from how prepared you are beforehand. Do you have good enough armor? A strong enough weapon? How many health potions did you bring? Did you use any buffs beforehand? Are there bonfires and healing lamps set up around the arena? You're still going to take the same amount of damage as before, it's just a matter of how well you can mitigate that damage, and whether or not you can kill the boss fast enough before it inevitably kills you. Perhaps this wouldn't be so bad if what you needed to defeat these bosses wasn't so painfully rare. I think all of the best weapons in this game are dropped by other enemies. You literally cannot craft them yourself. And these enemies are almost wholly uncommon, their drops even more so. Even when you do find one, there's still no guarantee you're gonna get what you want. So you know what that means? It's an unavoidable aspect of Terraria, and while I think the game gets away with it on your first playthrough because of how much you want to know what comes next, it is much more egregious on repeat playthroughs when you already know what's to come. I've played through Terraria almost twice, almost because I gave up after losing to the Empress of Light for the 3rd time in a row. I didn't want to find yet another prismatic lacewing, but more than that, I just didn't want to have to grind for a better weapon. It absolutely kills any sense of progression you might have, enough so to make me drop the game entirely even after almost 40 hours. But the best parts of this game are so good that I had to put it this high on the list. If you haven't played it before, then I'd suggest you should, as most of the problems I have with this game come from the tediousness of my second playthrough. Fair warning though, this game is very confusing when you first start out. I don't know if that's the game's fault, or if it's just the nature of the beast. If I had never played Minecraft before and you just dropped me into it, I would definitely have no idea what I was doing either. Terraria is a great game, and I'd love to be able to play through it more often. Again, the progression is really fun, but with how much grinding there often is, it makes for an experience that is anything but streamlined. It's hard to put into words what makes this game so amazing. Even as I'm sitting here writing this, I'm struggling to figure out what to put next. So, I'll just start with how I was introduced to this game. My sister played Outer Wilds first, and she had constantly kept bugging me to play it, until I begrudgingly picked it up on sale. I intended to get around to playing it later, until I told her I had bought it, and then she made me start playing it the exact same day. And from there, I was hooked. Every planet had to be explored, every log deciphered, and every puzzle solved. But most of all, the game was unlike anything I had ever played before in my life. If you haven't played Outer Wilds before, then please stop watching this video, and go play it for yourself. I do not want to spoil such a special experience for someone else. Before you go, just know that I think this game is nearly a masterpiece, and there are many reasons why. This is easily one of the best puzzle games I have ever played. They are just geniusly designed, and they all connect to each other in ways that truly boggle my mind. Let's take finding the coordinates for the Eye of the Universe as an example, a puzzle that spans across every major planet in the game. It's first presented to you as soon as you wake up. There's a space station orbiting Giants Deep that shoots out a probe at the start of every loop, and figuring out where this probe goes is the solution you need to find. But the space station breaks apart right afterwards, and the section of the station with the coordinates sinks into the planet's core. The interior of Giants Deep is inaccessible, as there's an invisible force that constantly pushes you back out. There is a way to bypass this force, but the solution is in a lab on Brittle Hollow, which itself takes some work to get to. Taking what you've learned, you can now access the interior of the planet, but there is yet another barrier that prevents you from reaching the core. So, you need to go to the Ash Twins next and learn how to avoid being killed by the giant anglerfish in the Dark Bramble. Doing this lets you finally explore the Dark Bramble and track down a missing member of the research team. Finding him will give you the subtle solution to enter the core of Giants Deep, and once you figure it out, you can finally make your way down to the space station and get the coordinates. If that sounded complicated enough, those were just the main steps. There's about a dozen or more smaller steps that I didn't even mention. That's admittedly a pretty big chunk of the game, but there are still 2 more puzzles like it, all 3 of which connect to the ultimate final puzzle, which is what leads to the end of the game. It's puzzles within puzzles within puzzles, with one main overarching one and 3 sub-puzzles, each with their own sub-puzzles. And this way they are all related to one another, and through their individual solutions, you can finally see the bigger picture. But it's more than just solving a puzzle. It's the joy of exploration, unearthing ancient history, and feeling genuine emotion. There are so many great moments in this game, both funny and heartfelt, like the way this island gets casually flung into space while you're in the middle of a conversation, or how you uncover the life, society, and ultimate extinction of the Nomai race. Or the optional stuff, like figuring out how the quantum moon works so that you can actually land on it, and learning the bizarre rules of black hole teleportation, which can lead to you accidentally cloning yourself and destroying the fabric of reality. Whoops. After such an incredible experience, I of course had to play the DLC afterwards, which is equal parts both absolutely horrifying and utterly fascinating. But the ending is ultimately beautiful. It seriously made me tear up a bit. The only problem that I have with Outer Wilds is that it can only be played once. Once you uncover the truth, it's impossible to play the game the same way ever again. The only thing that comes close to playing this game for the first time is to watch someone else play through this game for the first time, and live vicariously through their own unique experience, which is also why my sister recommended it to me in the first place. So, if you haven't played through the game and you're still watching this, I'll do you a favor and end the video now, so that you can experience it for yourself. Well, there it is, every single game I played for the first time this year. There were definitely a lot of ups and downs, and while there weren't too many heavy hitters, I'm still glad that I got to experience at least a couple of really unique games. While I'm here, I'd also like to take the opportunity to give myself a plug. Mainly, I try to stream every night here on YouTube, so if you ever want more of me, feel free to drop by sometime. I announce whenever I go live on Twitter, so follow me there if you're interested. That's about all. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I know it's a bit of a departure from the normal style I do, but I also want to be able to discuss the state of my channel from time to time as well. See ya!